Hi, my name is Diana. This is my channel, Bookish Di. As you can see, I'm back in my own place. I'm very excited to be back in just my space and not have to worry about like when I can record and like trying to snag that like hour and a half when my family's away at church. Anyway, I miss my family. I'm very happy I spent the time that I did with them, but I'm so glad just to be back in my own space. Yeah, so today I am again doing a much belated monthly wrap up. So I'm going to be talking about the 9 books that I read during the month of March. I did talk about 3 of them already when I did my Tome Topple vlog, which is already posted. I'll put a link to that in the card. And apologies if you can hear water running in the background. That is my cat's drinking fountain, and I'm going to see how it sounds in the audio for this, and if it's too annoying, I'll just make sure to unplug it next time I record. So overall, I read 9 books during the month of March. I have already talked about 3 of them a little bit during my Tome Topple reading vlog, which is already posted, so I'll put a link to that up in the cards. But for the most part, it was a fairly good reading month. There was one kind of bump in the road, and that was the book that I started out with. So first off, in the month of March, I read Chilling Effect by Valerie Valdez, and I listened to the audiobook narrated by Alchemy of Us. And so this is the first novel in a science fiction space opera series following Captain Eva Inocente, who is the captain of La Sirena Negra, and it initially follows some of her misadventures. So she is charged with bringing these psychic cats to a cat cafe. Delivery falls through and she's left with all these cats. And then she gets contacted by this criminal organization known as the Fridge, saying that they have her sister, Mari, and that they're gonna need Eva to run all sorts of errands in order for her to essentially earn her sister's freedom back. And so this was really a mixed bag for me. So I had initially started this book back in September for the Latinx Book Bingo, and I made it about a third of the way in, and I just kind of stopped because I didn't really like Eva that much. So one of my major problems with this book was Valdez didn't really seem to know what she wanted to do with Eva, because you have Eva going from like this kind of badass, cocky space captain who has a dark past that she doesn't like to talk about. And, you know, we're told that, you know, she's really determined and that she just like pushes her way through, but we don't always see that. And I feel like Valdez couldn't really decide how she wanted to characterize Eva. And the other thing too is that Eva keeps making these bad choices, and it's compounded by the fact that throughout most of the book, she just doesn't tell her crew members what's going on. And we don't really get like a compelling reason why. Like, she's saying that she's doing it for her sister, but we're told more than shown about the relationship with her and her sister. And we're never, I don't know, I never felt like I was ever given a compelling reason to care about what happened with Mari. One thing I did like about this book was the world building, and I think that's partially because this book is, at least for me, pretty apparent pro-pub Mass Effect fan fiction. And I mean that in both a good way and a bad way. In a good way, it has a lot of like the character types that I like. It has some cool, like, not just the, you know, Alliance military, but also like the more like criminal element. But it also has a downside because it made me start looking for where those connections were and made me kind of wonder, is Eva an analog for Shepard? Is she an analog for someone else? And yeah, it was disappointing. I ended up giving it 3 out of 5 stars. I think if I end up continuing this series, I'm going to check out the audiobook Prime Deceptions from my library. I don't think this is a series I'm going to continue buying. I was really underwhelmed by this first book, and I did love the narrator for the audiobook. That's what kind of kept me going when I restarted it recently. Alchemy of Us was fantastic as Eva and also as the other voices. So yeah, I'm really disappointed with this one. I really wanted to love it. So the second book that I read in March was a nonfiction nonfiction book, Loving Sports When They Don't Love You Back, Dilemmas of a Modern Fan, written by Jessica Luther and Kavitha Davidson. So I was familiar with Jessica Luther's work prior to reading this. She's a sports journalist who is based out of Texas, and she co-hosts one of my favorite podcasts, Burn It All Down, which is a feminist sports podcast. If you like sports at all, I highly recommend it. The hosts just do a really fantastic job talking about a wide range of sports and the way issues intersect with each other. And so I had heard from that podcast about this book, and I really loved it. So it is on the shorter side, which I do think is a little bit to its detriment, but it does talk about a wide range of issues. So it talks about the use of Indigenous mascots, it talks about race, it talks about sexism, it talks about sexual violence, concussions. So like I said, it covers a wide range of issues and a wide range of sports. And Davidson and Luther do a really good job of exploring different angles and exploring the question of, as people who love sports and as people who enjoy sports, how do we ethically consume these sports? And it does boil down to a bit of no ethical consumption under capitalism, but I think it also gives us a really good overview of like how people can try and resolve these issues. Like I said, I do think it could have been a little longer. I would have really enjoyed a couple more chapters. I'm not quite sure about what topic, but yeah, they do things like talk about public funding of stadiums, labor issues. So like I said, if you like sports at all, I would highly recommend picking up this book. It was one of the best ones I've read so far this year. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. It just really spoke to me as someone who does actually enjoy sports, who particularly likes college basketball, who works at a D1 university, but also recognizes the NCAA is terrible and should be abolished because it is super unethical and super exploitative. Anyway, highly recommend this book. Really loved it. It's probably going to end up on my best of 2020 list. So the third and fourth books that I read this month were actually rereads. So it was All Systems Red by Martha Wells and Artificial Condition, also by Martha Wells. These are the first 2 Murderbot novellas, and I was just kind of in the mood for something shorter and something that I was already familiar with. And I noticed on Hoopla that they had all 4 of the Murderbot novellas on audio, so I listened to them. They're narrated by Kevin R. Free, who I'm familiar with from Welcome to Night Vale. He is the voice of Kevin, who worships the smiling god and is very creepy. So it was a little, at least for me, a little disturbing to hear someone I associate with this evil smiling cult as Murderbot, but I think he did a really good job doing the voices and capturing the essence of Murderbot. And it was really nice to revisit these novellas because I haven't read them in a while. And I had also started rereading them with the guessing that Murderbot was going to be nominated for the Best Series Hugo, and I was right. And so I haven't read Network Effect yet, so this is me just refamiliarizing myself with the world, revisiting some old friends. But yeah, these were both very good. I would say, 4.5 stars out of 5. I love Murderbot a lot. They're one of my favorite characters. So yeah, really, really enjoyed revisiting these. The 5th book that I read this month was also a novella. This was Ring Shout by P. Jelly Clark. This was published by Tor.com last year, and it is a horror novel set in Georgia. It follows a young African-American woman, Maurice, who has been chosen by these otherworldly creatures that she calls the Aunties, and she wields the sword that captures the pain and determination of enslaved Africans. And she is hunting these extra-dimensional horror creatures called Ku Kluxes, who are reinvigorated by the re-showing of Birth of a Nation. And so she is working with some other women, one who was a former Harlem Hellfighter, one who is from I believe, Louisiana, And yeah, this was fantastic. It does get a little bloody, so content warning for blood, gore, body horror, death. But this was really good. I have previously read Clark's Black God Drums in 2019, which I had loved. And I had heard really good things about this novella, and so I picked it up, and it was absolutely phenomenal. I thought the world building was fantastic. I really enjoyed how Clark explored Maurice's psyche, her guilt, her determination, how she interacts with her past, and also how she interacts with the other characters. I really enjoyed how Clark brought in different elements of African and African-American spirituality, particularly the Gullah people from South Carolina. They're like really I don't have anything bad to say about this novella other than it did get a little gory for me. But I would definitely recommend this for folks who like horror, for folks who like explorations of the darker, more hate-filled, who are interested in books exploring race in America, particularly from a Black perspective. This just made me like Clark even as an author even more, and I'm really excited for his full-length novel coming out later this year. And I'm also really excited that this got nominated for a Hugo. This had been on my nomination ballot, and I am really excited for that. And it's going to be a hard ballot. I'm going to talk about that a little bit in a different project, but yeah, it's going to be a hard Hugo ballot, particularly for novella, because this and Riot Baby are both there, and those are both novellas that I really enjoyed. So this I gave about 4.75 out of 5. Yeah. So the next 3 books are books that I read for Tome Topple, and I did talk about them in my Tome Topple vlog. So the first one is Song of Blood and Stone by L. Penelope. This is the first in an epic fantasy series. I believe it is a quartet. So the last book is coming out later this year. And so this has you're following 4 different people. So the main plot, and this I believe is the plot that was initially self-published by L. Penelope, follows Jasminda and Jack. And Jasminda is a young woman who is biracial. In our world, she would be biracial, and I don't know if that's the right term in this story, but her mother is from the kingdom of Elsira, and her father was a refugee from the neighboring kingdom of Lagamar. And so she is on her way home when she discovers an army coming from Lagamar with a prisoner, and the reason they're able to cross over is the barrier between the 2 countries is starting to crack again. And so she has to save Jack and then try and find and fix the mantle to stop the invasion, because Jasminda is someone called an Earth Singer, which means that she has this magical power. The other plot line follows a married couple, Elsa and Ben. So Ben is an army commander. He's in the army. He's a staff sergeant, or he's a staffer to the Crown Prince. And then Elsa is his wife. She's a foreigner. So she's living in like the foreigners district in the capital of Elsira. And she gets contacted by her estranged sister and finds out her sister is pregnant, and then the baby, once it's born, gets kidnapped. And so Elsa's plot is dealing with more of the political aspects of the kingdom and trying to find her nephew. And so, as I had talked about in my Tome Topple vlog, I preferred Elsa's plotline to Jasminda and Jack's plotline. And I think it's because that was added later. So this is an expanded edition. So what I have, what has been expanded since that initial self-published novel. And I think L. Penelope has grown as a writer since then. And I also just found the political plotline much more interesting. I also, like, the romance between Jasminda and Jack was okay. Like, I don't really have any complaints, but like that's kind of like a big component of their story. Like, it's not the only one. You're dealing with some politics. You're also dealing with racism and xenophobia, so content warning for that. But for the most part, I enjoyed it. I thought the world building was really interesting. I enjoyed the characters, although, like I said, I did have some favorites. And I liked it enough where I definitely am interested in continuing this series. I do own the second book, so I don't know when exactly I'm going to get to that. But like I said, it is something I'm interested in. I thought for a first novel in a series, it did a good job of setting the table, so to speak. And I would say if you're looking for a more like romance-focused epic fantasy series by a non-white dude that has some good politics, some interesting world building, good characters, capable ladies, I would recommend picking up Song of Blood and Stone. I gave this 3.75 out of 5 stars. The next book I read was Winterkeep by Christian Kishore. This is the latest novel in her Graceling Realms series, and I absolutely love this book. Okay, so before I start gushing, just some, I guess, summary. So this book is set several years after the novel Bitter Blue, and it follows 3 main points of view. So we have Bitter Blue, who is the Queen of Montsea. We have Gideon, who is her longtime friend and ally, and he works with her on something called the Council, which is basically like dealing with tyrants and protecting folks who are Graceling, so those who have magical abilities. And Lovisa, who is a young woman who lives in Winterkeep, which is an island nation, and all their plot lines intersect when Bitter Blue receives word that her envoys to Winterkeep are dead or missing. And so she goes with Gideon and some other folks to try and find them. And Lovisa is trying to figure out what secrets her parents are keeping. And like I said, their plot lines intersect. And I loved this. And this was something that I talked about in my vlog, where I was a little unsure because, you know, authors are turning back to their worlds after a time away. It's either hit or miss. And I think this really worked because with the Graceling Realms novels, there's never been one main character. There have been characters who serve as through lines. So I'd say Bitter Blue is one of those characters. And Katza in both Graceling and Bitter Blue, and the character Lek in those first 3 books, but Graceling, Fire, and Bitter Blue, even if he's like not physically there, his presence is a through line. So I think that works in that there was never a story like ended that we're going back to, because I thought the ending of Bitter Blue was open enough where she could return to that world. And it also worked for me too, because it was telling a new story. And it wasn't, you know, it was telling something new and interesting and different set in this world. And I thought Lovisa was just a really interesting character. So content warnings in this book for abuse, both physical and emotional, from a parent, content warning for sex as a way of coping, kidnapping, forced confinement. I'm sure there are others. I would highly recommend checking the Storygraph. They have a good list of content warnings. And yeah, and a lot of this book is Lovisa learning more about the secrets her parents are keeping, and also taking a stand and doing what she believes is right, despite the fact that it could open her up for punishment. It could backfire on her. And I really loved this book. Like, it's really hard to describe, like, my notes aren't really good for this. But I really love Kishore's writing. I love how she has a lot of grace and empathy for her main characters. I loved that one of the central tenets of this book is that you are worthy of love, and that you have value, even if you don't think you do. And yeah, I highly recommend this book. I think it does avert the curse of the whole authors revisiting their world. I gave it a 5 out of 5. Highly recommend it. I loved it. I'm definitely going to be picking myself up a copy when it's in paperback. The last book that I read for Tome Topple was Thorne by Intisar Kanani. This is a YA fantasy retelling of the Goose Girl fairy tale where a young princess Alira gets betrothed to a prince of a neighboring empire, and on the way, her maid servant, who is this young woman named Valka, who we learn is the daughter of Alira's mother's like most trusted courtier, who Alira had like disgraced in some way. We don't find out for a while what happened. And Valka teams up with this Fae sorceress to essentially swap appearances with Alira. So Valka becomes the princess and Alira becomes the maidservant, and who becomes the Goose Girl. And I had picked this up because Jenny from Reading the End loves this book. She has talked this up so much, and so I decided to read it because of that. And it was really good. It is a bit slow. So that's for me kind of the downside, was it was slow to start, but I thought that it did a really good job of exploring justice, responsibility, classism. That was a big component. Yeah, I really enjoyed this novel. I would say content abuse for attempted rape, murder, abusive family. Again, I will link to the story graph because it does have a good list of content warnings, but those are the big ones that come to mind. Kanani has a companion novel set in the same world called Theft of Sunlight, and it follows a young girl, Ray, who we actually meet in a bonus story in this that's attached to this novel, and she is the oldest sister. She has a club foot, and it deals with a plot point that we find out about in this one, where there are people snatching young women and children and essentially disappearing them and selling them. And so I'm really looking forward to that, because I did really like Kanani's writing. I thought that it was really beautiful. I thought that she did a very good job with the characters and making you care about Alira and all the side characters. I would say also that one thing I did enjoy about this one, that it is low romance. So Alira starts out betrothed to the prince, and there's not really a romance in this book, which again, I appreciated. The prince is a character, and the betrothal is, a fact in this book, but it isn't like oh, we just met and we fell in love. It is, we are betrothed, we are going to get there potentially. So I did like that. I ended up giving this 4.25 stars out of 5, because again, it was a little too slow at the beginning for my particular taste, but I thought the ending was very good. The last book that I read in March was another nonfiction book. It is called The Alchemy of Us, How Humans and Matter Transformed One Another by Anissa Ramirez. And so this book, I had found out about it because I follow John Rogers on Twitter. He is one of the co-creators for Leverage, one of my favorite shows. And so he was talking about it because Ramirez is a material scientist. She works at MIT. And so I had seen him talk about it, and it sounded interesting because I'm trying to read more nonfiction this year. And so I put a hold in at the library, and it finally came in, and so I read it. And this book was really interesting. So she talks about, material science, from what I understand, I'm not a scientist, is focused on like the transformation of matter, understanding matter. It's like a weird intersection between chemistry and physics. And so Ramirez explores 8 different materials and 8 different concepts and the materials that create these like inventions and the people behind it. So she talks about time in terms of like creating steel for timepieces as well as quartz. She talks about like semiconductors for computers. She talks about light and the carbon filaments and how that's affected us. So I thought she did a good job of talking about the different elements and making it easy for someone who isn't a scientist to understand. And she talks about both the good and the bad benefits. And this is where I felt that it was a little hit or miss for me. So some of them, she really nailed the connections that she was trying to make, but others it fell short, and it felt like she was reaching and it didn't feel like there was enough like argumentation to back it up. And so I think that might be a little, your mileage may vary with some of the conclusions that she draws. But I think if you're looking for a really cool science book that's easy to understand, that makes you think about the different materials that we interact with on a regular basis, I would highly recommend this book. I really enjoyed it. I gave it a 3.75 out of 5 stars. The one thing that I want to check it out again just to look at the annotated bibliography again, because she includes so many sources that I didn't fully get a chance to look through, because I would definitely be interested in seeing some of the other books and articles that she references, because she does take a more wide-ranging look at these materials and look at the people behind the inventions of these materials. Hi everyone, this is editing Diana, and I realized that there was one book that I forgot to talk about in my March wrap-up, and that was the book I ended up DNF-ing. So I normally don't, my DNF-ing policy is kind of weird, because sometimes I will read a chapter or two of a book, and if it's not working for me, I'll just walk away, and I won't count that as something that I've read or that I've DNF'd. And for some books where I will get far enough in, if I step aside, I still count it as something as I'm currently reading. Like 2 of the books that I read this month, which were Chilling Effect and Song of Blood and Stone, those were books that I technically started last year and that I ended up finishing this year. So I didn't count them as DNFs because I had always planned on coming back to them at some point. But I ended up DNFing, marking as a DNF, Lore by Alexandra Bracken. And so I had started this book at the end of January, and then I was making good progress. I got about halfway through, and then it became time to turn in my loan, and I could still access it via Hoopla, and I had checked it out with the intention of finishing the book, but I just never got around to it. And honestly, like, the more time that I spent away from it, the more I'm fine with actually marking it as a DNF. I think that while I was reading it, it was very readable. It did move at a very brisk pace, but I don't really have any strong attachment to the characters or the plot. So the premise of Lore is that a bunch of Greek gods rebel against Zeus as punishment. He strips them of their powers, and every 9 years, select families hunt them, and if one of the family members kills the god, they get the powers and they become like a new god. And so one thing that I didn't particularly enjoy while I was reading it was I didn't like how there was no real questioning about why Zeus did this. And it was particularly frustrating because I had finished last year the Trials of Apollo, and the Trials of Apollo is, and I'm sorry you can hear my cat in the background, is really explicit about the fact that Zeus is the fucking worst and that he's an abusive parent, and the myths back that up. Zeus is awful, and we never get that. It's always like Zeus is never portrayed as anything but in a beneficial light, and we never really. It's been like a month, 2 months at this point since I last touched this book, but like I don't remember there ever being an explanation for why the gods rebelled. I didn't really find the characters compelling. So I think had I not had to turn it in, I probably would have finished it. But the way it is, I am marking this as a DNF. I don't plan on going back to it. It's not something that really, like, I don't feel compelled to see how it ends. Like with Chilling Effect, I was like, okay, you know, I am interested to see what happens with Eva and Mari and the rest of her crew and how that resolves. And also I wanted to see, like, was Eva actually the Commander Shepard stand-in, or was she someone else? And then with Song of Blood and Stone, I didn't really like the characters. I just wasn't in the mood for like a lot of big epic fantasy. And so it wasn't something that like I said, I had always intended to go back to it. It just wasn't what I was in the mood for a lot of 2020 and part of 2021. So yeah, I DNF'd Lore. I don't really have much else to say about that. So yeah, that was my March. 9 read books, 1 official DNF. So Leia's in the background. So if you have any opinions about the books I did read or about the book I DNF'd, please let me know in the comments below. If any of the books sound interesting, also please let me know. And if you like what you see, please like and subscribe, and I will chat with you later. Have a good day. Bye.